pleased to be here today. I can't believe what a terrific turnout this is. It's fabulous. It's really an honor to participate in this special occasion. Growing up, I heard many, many stories of Aunt Elizabeth, and I should add her sisters and brothers. It was a remarkable generation of 9 siblings whose father made sure that his 5 girls were equally as well educated as his 4 boys. She was born in England and came over here when she was, Janice will tell me, 12? 11. She's a historian who now knows much more than I ever will about Elizabeth. And after getting her medical degree, this of course is where she set up her infirmary for poor women and children. It means a great deal to me to see this exact spot today after hearing about it for so many years. She was not a woman who sought personal recognition, but I know she would be deeply touched to know that her trailblazing efforts to meet the needs of those women and children are being recognized here today and remembered by the Greenwich Village Society for Historical Preservation, and amazed to know that the small clinic and hospital and medical school that she and her sister Emily started lives on today at the New York Presbyterian Hospital in Lower Manhattan. After the ostracism and loneliness that she suffered as she began her medical career in 1849 at what is now Hobart William Smith, I hope she's looking down from heaven this evening and delighting in the fact that now, 169 years later, approximately half of all medical students are women. So, on behalf of our entire Blackwell family, thank you so much for all of your efforts, the Radcliffe Institutes, over at William Smith, New York Presbyterian, everybody's efforts, and Andrew and your colleagues for recognizing her important trailblazing work. I can't wait to see this. Thank you.
It's truly our honor and privilege to be able to do this. Our next speaker is Betty Bayer from Hobart and William Smith Colleges. Dr. Blackwell studied at what was then called Geneva Medical College in upstate New York and is now Hobart and William Smith Colleges, the coordinate liberal arts schools that continue the legacy of Geneva Medical College. Betty Bayer is an expert on the intersections of women's history, psychology, science, religion, and spirituality. She's explored the abolitionists and women's rights movements and their common history in central New York. Recognized for her outstanding teaching, Bayer received the college's Distinguished Faculty Teaching Award in 2004 and the Community Service Award in 2009. She served as the chair of the Women's Studies program since 2001 and directed the Fisher Center for the Study of Women and Men from 2002 to 2009. A former senior fellow at the Martin Marty Center for the Study of Religion at the University of Chicago, Bayer earned her PhD, MA, and BA in psychology from Carleton University, Ottawa, Canada. Without further ado, Betty.
Thank you. It's a distinct honor to be here today. And as you know, honoring a site and putting a woman's name on a landmark site is a very, very important step. And so I want to thank the Greenwich Historical Society for doing this and helping to close the gender gap by adding one more woman's name to a landmark site. Some of you may be familiar with the various movements. One of them is called Put Her Name on It Now. So for street signs, buildings, and also to ensure that we have sculptures honoring women. As Andrew mentioned, Elizabeth Blackwell received her medical degree, and she was the first woman to receive a degree in medicine at the Geneva Medical Academy, which is now Hobart Men's College, and William Smith is the Women's College. If you have visited our campus, you have probably encountered a sculpture on our quad of Elizabeth Blackwell, and she is situated between the sciences and the humanities. And this is a very apt place for her to be. Because her questions in medicine and the sciences more broadly were and are ones of our humanity. She really asked us about the kind of world we want to create. One of my favorite self-descriptions that Elizabeth Blackwell wrote about about her and her sisters was that they had the habit, and I quote her, of unconscious independence. Blackwell's questions on humanity, on how we want to live here together, took on the shape of a women's rights issue as she came up against what she described, and I will quote her, a blank wall of social and professional antagonism. So that habit of unconscious independence served her very well. For as many of us know, she encountered a very lengthy and trying path to be admitted to medical school, including a suggestion that she really ought to go to Paris and don male garb and then have a couple of people monitor her in case anybody was onto it. She was admitted in 1847 to Geneva Medical College, and it was an acceptance determined by a vote of the student body. The faculty turned it over to the students, the male students, to determine the decision. And it involved a set of resolutions, the first of which I really want to read. It's interesting in light of things today. It goes, the radical principles of a Republican government, including, quote, universal education of both sexes, and, quote, that to every branch of scientific education the doors should be open equally to all. Mid-19th century. We're working it out. Long road. But claiming doors are open is one thing and full access is another, and that holds true today. In her time in medical school, Elizabeth Blackwell had to lobby, once admitted, to attend classes on anatomy, dissection, and reproduction. Then she hit more obstacles when she was seeking a placement to practice and/or a location to set up her practice. These obstacles prompted her to found an infirmary for women and children, and brings us to this commemoration today. But in this step, I really want to emphasize how Blackwell was very astute. She sensed a sea change, I think, in the fields of science and medicine. And we can hear this insight in her 1855 address to women entering medical college. Women in medicine, she said, and I quote her, are, quote, not a new idea. Women, she continued, having, and I quote, presided over the birth of children and maintained for almost 6,000 years a definite medical position, understand that, quote, the whole world is born under the care of a woman. How was it, she wondered, that the recent employment of men in midwifery had managed to wipe out within a few years, and I quote her, the universal experience of the world for so many thousand? Women in science of astronomy at that time were asking similar questions. A field that had been open to women was closing. The contradictory facts. Women had been midwives and assumed roles of medical care, and they had charted the movement of and discovery of stars and planets. This tells us less about women's capacity for science and more about the shifting terrain of science and gatekeeping, of how science took on a gendered form in Blackwell's time and our own. This may be why Blackwell, in addressing women, medical students in England, advised them, as only she could, to question rather than accept, and I quote her, the government and instruction of men is final, and added, women are rising above the errors of the past and blind acceptance of imperfect authority. Blackwell reinvented the medical curriculum. She reset standards of admission to medical school. She built programs centered on practice and theory, and she introduced new areas to medicine, including hygiene. And within years of opening this infirmary, she had established, through her intellectual independence, the intellectual strength and value of women in medicine. This is not simply about opening the doors to women. It was about challenging how previous open doors had become closed, about remaking science and medicine, and doing so in ways for generations of women to enter the field. That's a legacy significant to us all today. And that's why, as we like to say at the National Women's Hall of Fame in Seneca Falls, where Elizabeth Blackwell was one of the inaugural inductees, we need to appreciate how women's history is American history. Elizabeth Blackwell's history is American history. It is a history about future possibilities, a history without which we impoverish our fields, such as medicine, our sense of who we are, and our very humanity. Within 9 days of arriving at Geneva Medical Academy, Elizabeth Blackwell wrote in her journal that she could not, and I quote her, but congratulate herself on having found at last the right place for her beginning. Her reflection came after being in class that day and studying medicine. Accomplished top medical student, leader in re-envisioning medicine and science, the Greenwich Village Society for Historical Preservation is to be congratulated on placing a plaque on this historic site to remind us all of women's beginnings as part of who we are today and of our history in creating the future. Thank you.
Quickly, I just want to say before our next speaker comes up, I think everybody who's spoken so far and will speak really demonstrates how the preservation of history and the perpetuation of these stories is really not an esoteric affair, but in fact it's very germane to our lives today and the lessons that we can take from that. Sometimes we need to keep learning them, and hopefully a little bit of that will take place today. Today we're honoring the first U.S. hospital staffed entirely by women. That hospital, in fact, evolved into today's New York Presbyterian Lower Manhattan Hospital. And so our next speaker is Dr. Judy Tung, MD, the chair of the Department of Medicine at the New York Presbyterian Lower Manhattan Hospital and associate professor of clinical medicine at Weill Cornell. She also serves as the section chief of ambulatory internal medicine at Weill Cornell Medicine. Committed to providing high-quality, comprehensive care, Dr. Tung's philosophy of practice prioritizes communication and continuity. Her clinical interests are in women's health and preventive medicine. Welcome, Dr. Tung.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for coming to this amazing occasion. As you know, Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell was the first female physician in the United States, and as you also have heard, she founded the first American hospital staffed by women for women. That hospital, the New York Infirmary for Indigent Women and Children, eventually evolved into what is today the New York Presbyterian Lower Manhattan Hospital, where I work as chair in the Department of Medicine. Dr. Blackwell also launched a medical college in 1868, devoted entirely to the medical education of women. The Women's Medical College of the New York Infirmary became one of the first four-year medical colleges in the country, earning a reputation for its rigor and excellence, elevating standards for all physicians. And after 3 decades, the Women's Medical College was incorporated into what is today the Weill Cornell Medical College, where I serve on faculty. So, as a female physician serving in the hospital and in the medical school founded by Dr. Blackwell, I am proud to call myself a direct descendant. I have benefited from and have been inspired by her in so many ways. Elizabeth Blackwell's legacy is very much alive in our hospital. Physically, we feel her presence every day. We have large, colorful murals of the infirmary and dispensary displayed in our hospital. Beautiful but stern oil portraits of her and her sister, Dr. Emily Blackwell. We even have Elizabeth's and Emily's writing desk from Bristol, England, and the street corner is named Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell Place. But reminders of Dr. Blackwell go beyond these physical artifacts. Her true legacy lives on in our hospital's commitment to the community and to the women and children. Last year, there were 3,000 babies delivered at the New York Presbyterian Lower Manhattan Hospital. This urban community hospital is the only hospital now in Lower Manhattan, and we are proud to be part of the wonderful and diverse area in which we serve. Like Dr. Blackwell, who provided free care to those who couldn't afford it, we believe that everyone has a right to high quality of care, no matter the ability to pay. And Dr. Blackwell's social consciousness is present there in the ways that we value this diversity and value the way that we care for people. As a primary care doctor, I also particularly admire her commitment to caring for the whole person. I admire how she pioneered hygiene, prevention, sending teams to visit the indigent in their homes in the slums to teach them the importance of fresh air, nutrition, and oftentimes even bringing with her a jar of soup or a piece of meat. Dr. Blackwell is an inspiration to all physicians, but especially women physicians. She has carved the pathway for generations of female students, trainees, women physicians, scientists, and leaders. Although there is 50% enrollment of women in medical colleges, it is far less than that amongst those in professorships, chiefs, and chair positions, and we still have work to do. She is the reason why I am privileged to be here today. She has shown us the importance of thinking outside the box, the power of good mentors, and have been brave enough to reach for things that historically may not have been ours to reach for. And most importantly, she reminds me never to forget the roots of why we entered medicine, to serve the people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tong. Last but not least, we welcome a woman active in our local neighborhood and community. Virginia Reith, RPA and MPH, has been a practicing clinician, educator, and activist in the fields of gynecology, sexual and reproductive health for the past 30 years. Pretty impressive. She was the recipient of the ACLU Reproductive Rights Award for her work and activism in women's sexual reproductive health and justice. She has lived in the neighborhood since 1975. Virginia.
Thank you.
She's my neighbor. I didn't even know all this
It's so
about
nice
her.
to see so many familiar faces. So, in the early 1970s, I was deciding to drop out of art school, and I was thinking about studying medicine, which felt like a daunting task. When I happened upon the book, Witches, Nurses, and Midwives, The History of Women Healers, written in 1972 by Barbara Ehrenreich and Deirdre English, who I was fortunate enough to work with years later at Health Right. It was here that I first read the stories of medicine and the roles of women in medicine, and especially that of Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell. And I was so inspired by her story and her history, and I was so relieved at the time of our mutual dread of studying medicine, of the actual studying of medicine. So in large part, that book, and especially the life of Dr. Blackwell, indeed changed my path as a young feminist artist to go on and actually become a women's health, reproductive, and sexual health provider. So imagine my surprise and delight to find out that Elizabeth Blackwell's first hospital for women and children, the infirmary that was staffed by women and run by women, for women, had existed once right here in my own neighborhood, where I have lived and practiced for the last 35 years. And I have walked by this building thousands of times. As I reflect on the presence of the history of this building, once the infirmary for women and children, and also the presence of Planned Parenthood down the street, I know that women's lives have been changed for the better by the health services that were made available to them by nurses, midwives, PAs, nurse practitioners, LPNs, and doctors. So what can the history of this building teach us or remind us today in 2018? That above all, we need the kind of perseverance that Blackwell herself had. Her kind of perseverance changed her world, and therefore ours. But we are not yet finished changing ours for the next generation. As Blackwell said, if society will not admit of women's free development, then society must be remodeled. So let the remodeling begin. That we can and we will change these conditions that are oppressive, unjust, intolerable acts against the freedom of all women to live freely. So that our stories become one history as we fight for the full frontal visibility and equity we deserve. So I hope for all of us here and all the people who pass this building that this plaque helps us remember that we are each responsible to try to change, to remodel consciousness and attitudes in any way, anywhere we can. Those which continue to belittle women, to shame and disrespect them, to brutalize them, to humiliate them, to make less than, to make women prisoners of their bodies by denying them full health parity and reproductive and sexual health and justice. Enough is enough, and I think Blackwell would agree. As women, and as many of the people here, women and men, we want and demand respect as full citizens of the world. And like Blackwell and her sisters, we will persevere. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Virginia is actually neither least nor last. We actually do have one more speaker, and my apologies for skipping over Jen Weintraub. Jen is a digital archivist and librarian at the Schlesinger Library at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard University, where she coordinates work with born digital materials while expanding the already robust work to digitize the library's collections. She served as the chairperson of the Schlesinger's Library's 2016 exhibition, Women of the Blackwell Family, Resilience and Change. She has also held digitization-focused positions at Yale University Library, among others. She holds an MLIS from University of Michigan and a BA from the University of Chicago. Jen, please join us.
I'm so excited to represent the Schlesinger Library here today at the unveiling of this plaque. The Schlesinger holds important papers from the whole Blackwell family, I think 4 generations worth. And a couple years ago we got a big NEH grant and we digitized them all. So you can look at them online. So as soon as you go home, go Google it. Schlesinger, Blackwell, you'll go right there. So I just want to talk a little bit about the context of Elizabeth Blackwell, her family, her remarkable family, and also a little bit about what happened in this building, because it's very interesting. So not only were Elizabeth Blackwell's parents very remarkable in their own right because of their desire for education for their 5 daughters as equal to their 4 sons, but the father was an abolitionist because he was a sugar refiner in England and in the United States, and he was trying to refine sugar beets rather than sugar cane because he knew that sugar cane came from slavery. So the whole family was also an abolitionist family. And not only, none of the girls married, all 5 of those daughters, none of them married. They all became writers and artists, and there were 2 doctors, Elizabeth and Emily. And of the sons, 2 of them married 2 remarkable feminists in the 19th century. One married Lucy Stone, who's well known for not having changed her name when she married. And the other one married Antoinette Brown Blackwell, who became the first Protestant minister in the woman Protestant minister in the United States. So remarkable people, really an amazing family. So money was very tight for the Blackwell women, and they're really self-made doctors. Their parents had no money, and they made their money by carefully saving. Elizabeth Blackwell came to New York. She bought a piece of property with her small investments, and she took on boarders, and that's how she supported herself as she built up her practice, and then was able to get this building. And her sister came after having been rejected from 11 medical schools and having been trained in Edinburgh and Paris, and then came and became a partner with Elizabeth in this infirmary. And we have a draft of that partnership. And what's interesting is, I think they thought that it would go so well, actually, even though they were, worried about it, that maybe Elizabeth would move uptown and open another infirmary. At least this is a draft we have. So, but just imagine that in 1856, women doctors are suspect in every way. So they found this building, and they took on a 3rd partner, Dr. Zakrzewska, Dr. Marie Zakrzewska, who came from Germany. And they opened this infirmary on May 12th, 1856, which was Florence Nightingale's birthday. So that was also very, very memorable. And so Dr. Zakrzewska wrote an interesting book, and she talks about what actually happened in this building. And it's nice because you can actually see that on the 2nd floor were the wards, and there were 2 rooms, 6 beds in each room. On the third floor was a maternity ward, and on the very top floor, where you can still see the shape of the building, that was the attic, and that's where the medical students who were training with them slept, as well as the nurses and any of the staff. There was no heat in the building, no furnace. They had coal fireplaces. And Dr. Zakshevska talks about waking up at 5:30 in the morning to get the food and the medicine for the clinic, seeing patients all day, and then she also had to go out and see private patients because they really weren't making a ton of money at the beginning because they were treating poor and indigent women. And then she came back, and the medical students would prepare dressings from 7 to 9, and everyone went to bed at 11:30 after midwifery training. And finally, the other thing I want to talk about Dr. Zakshevska, because she spoke about an incident where a woman patient died here, unfortunately, and the male members of the family came to the hospital with pickaxes and shovels and yelling that women doctors in the clinic were killing other women, but the police came to protect the hospital because by then they'd already had a good reputation. So they really were remarkable. Elizabeth Blackwell, as we noted, remained a force for her entire life, even after she left the United States for England. She became involved in many other efforts in addition to establishing a hospital for women in London, sanitation, moral reform. She was against vivisection, but also against contraception, so she was quite idiosyncratic. She died in 1911, and her sister Emily, who helped establish the infirmary with her, she also died in 1911. She had retired by then and moved with her life partner, Dr. Elizabeth Cushier, to New Jersey and Maine. But what I just want to note about Emily, because without Emily, the infirmary would not have grown to become the hospital it did. She lobbied New York State, she lobbied New York City for more resources and support, and that's why they were able to be such a success and eventually joined with New York Presbyterian. So anyway, come to the Schlesinger Library website with the Blackwell family papers. They're very interesting, and thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Thank you so much. What an